Hello and welcome to today's AM Quartex webinar, Embedding Accessibility into Digital Collections. I'm really excited to have you here with us today, and we have a fantastic panel lined up for you. I'm sure you're as keen as I am to hear how they've each approached accessibility at their library. Just going to move the slide on a second. So my name is Mark Jones and I'm the marketing manager for Quartex at AM. And before we get started, we're going to cover off some housekeeping items for anyone who hasn't joined us in this platform before and introduce our panel. So today's session is being recorded. So if you experience any connectivity issues or you need to leave before the end, the recording will be available within the next couple of days. I want to acknowledge at this point that we're not able to generate live closed captions for today's live session, but we will be making a captioned version of the session recording available for anyone who would like it. Your microphone has been muted to avoid any background noise interfering with the audio quality. You can adjust your own viewer settings to enlarge or reduce the size of the screen share and the speaker webcams. If you have any issues with the sound or the visuals, please try connecting again using the dial-in number provided in your webinar invite email. And if any issues persist, we'll do our best to help. The question and answer function is enabled for today's webinar, so please feel free to use it for any questions you have during the session. And finally, if you find that you have no audio at all, hopefully it won't happen, but if you do, please leave the webinar and rejoin, making sure you select the computer audio option. So with that, I can move on and introduce today's panel. So really excited to be joined by two partners from the Quartex user community, as well as by our platform development team, which works with Quartex partners and with users of our primary source collections to enhance Quartex's capabilities for all. From Towson University, based in Maryland, please welcome Ashley Todd Diaz, Assistant University Librarian, and Felicity Knox, Assistant University Archivist, both from the Special Collections and University Archives. From Syracuse University in New York State, we're joined by Deirdre Joyce, Head of Digital Stewardship and the Digital Library Programme, and Corinne Sartori, the library's Accessibility Specialist. And from AM, we're excited to welcome Yasmin Burton-Law, UX Designer in the Quartex Platform Development Team. And finally, many of you will know Martin Drew, Head of Customer Experience for Quartex at AM, who is going to lead today's discussion. So with that, I will turn off my mic and I'll pass over to Martin to get the session started.
Thank you, Mark. Well, it's great to have everyone here today, and I think we're going to dedicate some time to each implementation of Quartex. Coming first to the team at Towson. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the implementation of Quartex and accessibility measures, but I think it would be great to hear first why accessibility was so important to you. And I think, Felicity, if I could address that to you, that would be great.
Sure, happy to talk about it. So this is our first attempt at having a digital collections system, which will probably be familiar to many folks viewing this. When I started here in 2009, I was a staff member. We had one trained archivist, and we didn't have, it was a pretty small department. It was me and one other person, and this was what we had in place. We eventually hired a second staff person, but again, not a lot of manpower. And our previous dean at that point, she was really focused on making sure things were digitized and accessible, I guess more available than accessible. Accessible really wasn't really on our minds as much. It's just making things findable and usable for researchers. So there was no thoughts about preservation or accessibility at that point. So yeah, we have this visual asset management system, and a lot of things in it, including many of the things pictured in the slide. I had to like steal this from the Wayback Machine because we didn't have a photo of it. But many of these objects specifically, so our student newspapers and our yearbooks, they're compound objects, which sort of made it actually that much harder to think about accessibility because they were PDF files, and we'll get more into why that was a problem in the future. There was some OCR that was done on these objects when we pulled them into the system, but it wasn't perfect, and it certainly, we didn't have the manpower to make sure that things read as they did on the page. So that was a problem as well. And as you can see, we have no capacity to change this site, really. It didn't look like us. Our colors are black and gold, as you can see by our brand mark at the top. And so this blue doesn't really match at all with what we were doing. And we had no capacity to change any of that to make it helpful to anybody using it. And also we had to upload videos to a whole different platform, because when people tried to play videos here, it kind of crashed or lagged, and there was certainly not a lot of options for transcription or anything like that with this site. So that was a lot of problems in a small amount of time to explain why we were certainly looking for something different.
So it sounds like discoverability was the key emphasis there, without being able to put too much onto the accessibility elements.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it was sort of a brand new thing for us, a brand new thing for the library, for the archives. So yeah, it was the goal was to make sure people knew we had things. That was the key.
Yeah. And what year did you build out this site, your first digital collection site?
With this particular one
Yeah.
that's pictured?
Yeah.
I started in the archives in 2009, and we were just beginning to add things in. I think we had gotten it the previous year.
Yeah.
And at that point, mostly we were spending a lot of time on photos. We had yearbooks up to a certain amount of time that we were putting in, and then we had one part of the student newspapers. But then it got tricky about how to pull those items in. And again, small manpower. We were still doing all the other things that you do in an archives besides this piece. This was just a component of what our work was.
So then accessibility was a concern. We know it was a concern for you when you came to start talking to us about potential use of Quartex. This is what I'm asking. How did you actually sort of implement any strategy, including accessibility?
So in 2017, the university, Towson University, received a complaint from the Office of Civil Rights, as many institutions had around that time, that was specifically looking at several primary websites within the university, including the library's website. And it called out the fact that several of our resources were not accessible, color contrast, the ability that was within our reach to make these things accessible to screen readers and different technology. And so that became a focus of the institution to really understand where we could do better and where the problematic points were. And our digital collections were flagged as one of those primary challenges because, as Felicity mentioned, we had, just looking at the student newspaper collection alone, over 2,200 compound PDF objects that had not taken accessibility into account. So to try and work backwards through all of those files and increase their accessibility, while also understanding that there were certain aspects of the website itself that were problematic, became several stumbling points. And so later in 2017, the library undertook a software audit, and we got a sense of where vendors were in terms of wanting to work with us on web accessibility. And unfortunately, some of the companies that we were working with, it was not a priority for them. And we realized that we needed to perhaps seek out other options. And so AM Quartex was something that presented itself to us as a potential piece of software. We had a great demo and a great rapport with the team, and it was really appealing that there was that willingness to talk about web accessibility, that it was something that was not only built into our agreement, but that part of this new culture of accessibility was a study of the current web accessibility and general accessibility of a new piece of software that was coming onto campus. And when that study had been done of Quartex, everybody was very willing to come to the table and talk about the findings and plot out how we could work towards some of those improvements. So that was very appealing to us.
Yeah, I think we were aware when we first started discussion with you that we weren't doing everything that we could be, but we were keen to get there. So I think that's probably what came across, isn't it? Yeah, so talk to us, Ashley, then about how you were able to implement some of these elements actually in Quartex to deliver a more accessible site.
Well, so we have two that we would like to talk about. Felicity, would you like to talk about the first?
Yes. So I'm actually I'm in place of a couple of our colleagues who are really the spearheading these projects, and they have since moved on to other institutions. Or so I'm going to talk about what I see as the impacts that they helped create with AM Quartex altogether. So one of our colleagues, she served as the go-between for our accessibility team that Ashley was talking about and Quartex, and she helped us by creating this research guide that you see on the left, and this is something that a lot of libraries use. This is an internal research guide, and she drafted it so we would know how to continue to build sites based on those based on the things that Adam Matthews had put in place and that we had agreed to with the accessibility team. So it serves essentially as like a style guide for us. And so she has every element listed that you could have when you're building a site in the Quartex. She has all of the things that we agreed to as far as the high contrast footers, which is, I know, one thing that we really had a lot of discussions about were the color contrast concerns. So she created this, and this is something that we have used going forward as we built our sites without her input any longer. But she was able to build that because there was a lot of discussion and agreement about what could or couldn't be done and what we could actually control or manipulate on our side to make the site what we wanted it to look like and what our accessibility team said that they wanted us to be able to offer to researchers and users.
So you've got like a best practice around web page creation with accessibility in mind, effectively.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great resource, yeah. And then how about some of the functionality itself with reference to the other image?
Yeah, so one of the things that we really place a focus on within our special collections and university archives is connecting with our student researchers, and particularly bringing classes in, bringing student organizations in, working with them to understand primary sources and the types of materials that we have, and knowing that this content is broadly available online, and in many cases it's in an unmediated space. So we may not be able to work directly with each of our researchers or people that are interacting with our content. So the ability to offer certain accessibility functionality within our platform is really important to us. So this other example is looking at some of our AV content and the ability for our researchers to benefit from not just a transcript, but also a transcript that will auto scroll along with the video, that will benefit from captioning that is customizable, and that also has a search functionality that is benefiting from that transcript as well. So our researchers are able to dive into the content in a variety of ways that make it more approachable and accessible. So I would like to share just a brief demo of this for you. So this is an oral history that we captured last July with the help of a student researcher, actually. But so these ladies are alumni. And so we have our typical metadata on one tab, and then on the other tab, we have that transcript that I mentioned that's auto-scrolling. And so if we...
And this is live in your Quartex site, Ashley?
This is live currently, yes. And so we are going to be making sure that all of our AV moving forward are able to have this functionality. So it is based off of a certain file format. So we're using a VTT file format for this, for the transcript. But as I mentioned, you're able to search within the transcript, and we know that Linda Morris has a great story about our bell tower that she talks about, and so we know that the word bell is mentioned 4 times based on that, which is highlighted in the transcript so that, you know, if you wanted to hear about that particular story, you know which part of the video to access. And so as she is talking, you can follow along in the transcript, but you can also add captions. So there's a standard caption style that pops up when you click that button, but you're also able to adjust that. So you can change the font size if you want to see more of the image. You can change your text edge style, depending on what is most readable to you, if a sans serif versus a serif versus script. If that is of interest, you can change the text color, the background color, all to make this a more enjoyable and accessible experience.
That's great. That's a nice example. Thanks, Ashley. So that's showing us both discovery and discoverability, I suppose, but with accessibility in mind because of the closed caption generation. And you can edit those closed captions in the platform, can you, if you wish to. Perfect. Thank you. It's good to see an example of something we've instituted actually coming in a live site there. And there'll be the opportunity to talk with both Ashley and Felicity at the end of the webinar when we can ask any questions. But also, I think we were just going to show quickly what your new site looks like on a homepage compared to your old one there. And I think that shows some of the contrast is definitely there. So yeah, and a nice looking site as well. But now we're just going to go over quickly to talk to the team at Syracuse as well, because I think you guys came on board at about the same time for use of Quartex. Deirdre, I wonder if I can ask the same question of you about how important accessibility was to you in terms of your considerations in the library.
Okay, there I am. Yeah, so yeah, at Syracuse University, we have a very long history with accessibility, disability studies. Going back into the 70s, we have our School of Education was just kind of one of the groundbreaking schools for disability studies. And so it's always been kind of a feature of Syracuse University and just what it is that we care about. Much like Towson, our colleagues at Towson, we also received the complaint in 2017. So I think a lot of us experienced that. And part of that response, but I think something that had already been in the works was the creation of this very comprehensive policy. It's the Information and Communication Technology Policy at Syracuse University, and it was a policy that was put forth to ensure that everything that we do present, say, online with any kind of information technology was going to be accessible, not just for not just for our external users, but also for our internal users. But of course, we think about the content that is being produced for the broader audience, and especially in my role as the head of digital stewardship and the digital library. Unlike Towson, we're kind of separated from special collections, and we're an internal service department, but the sort of our main marker is ensuring that the content that we create is both accessible and usable by our for our end users. So that is that's something that we were being really mindful of. And so when we enter into these agreements with, not just Quartex, but, we have institutional repository, we have a number of different systems that we create, we put them through a rigorous process to ensure that the content that is being created on those various platforms is going to be accessible. As we go into this next year, we are working on an academic strategic plan and the library's place in that. And a huge part of that is going to be equitable digital engagement, and things like the platforms on which we make our materials accessible is a key piece of that as well. So so we in digital stewardship, we collaborate really closely with library IT to make our materials accessible. But yeah, that's sort of that's the center of it all.
And is there a specific standard or standards that you always look for?
Yeah, yes. We require all of our materials to be available at WCAG 2. Whatever it is. We used to call it 2.0, then 2.1, and now we call it 2.x. So wherever we are, we want to ensure that we are bringing our materials up to that internet technology standard.
That's right. Yeah.
Or
so
software.
I think 2.2 is on the way, isn't it? So
yeah.
So Quartex aims to allow any customer to publish a WCAG 2.1 AA compliant site.
Correct.
That's our goal. We've still got little bits to do, but we're nearly there. So we can come into that a bit later. But how are you actually implementing some of your aims here in terms of accessibility?
Well, we're working very closely with Corinne, my colleague here, and she plays a huge part anytime we publish anything online in terms of websites. So we just redid our library's website. Corinne, or actually the person prior to her, went through that website to ensure that it was fully accessible. And so now, as we're producing sites with Quartex, we're working closely with Corinne to ensure that we're kind of ticking off that list of requirements that bridge both accessibility and usability. So those are a couple of things. And then we're also just thinking closely, thinking about the content that we're creating, ensuring that we're, again, much like Towson, getting captions on our audiovisual files and using OCR to create transcripts from any PDF materials that we might have. So yeah.
That's great. Corinne, do you want to run us through some of the details as to how you're actually making this happen?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. Hi, I'm Corinne. So I am the accessibility specialist at Syracuse University, specifically for the library. So as Dia just said, that I do a lot of the work making sure that all of our content, all of our software that we have, whoever we work with, our vendors, is accessible both front end and back end. So part of this is we partner with our vendors and assess their software. So part of our process is that we require whatever vendor that we work with for whatever software it is, that we have them get a VPAT, which is a voluntary product accessibility template. We have them go through usually a verified third party, such as like DEX Systems, and have them go through a rigorous audit. Then they give it to me, and I go, okay, give me a sandbox of the product. I basically kind of cross-check. It's not an audit. I cross-check to make sure that it is accessible, or hey, I noticed this will be an issue in the future. Let's work together on making sure this will be accessible in this time frame or whatnot. Because of that, we have so many different kinds of compliance acknowledgements that I submit to our central IT team to make sure to just be like, hey, we're going to buy this product. We know that we have so many different products are, to go through. Especially with libraries, there's a lot of instances where this software is not is the only option. That software is the only option out there because it's so niche. So what we end up doing is we have different things such as a policy exclusion acknowledgement, which really what we do is it basically acknowledges that this product may, for example, only be used by one person, and we're only buying it for one person, and that person does not have issues with these, accessibility issues. We also have like a compliance software acknowledgement where like if for however reason it's 100% compliant, it rarely ever is. But if it is, we do have that, and we can just say, hey, this is 100% compliant. There should be no issue. And then obviously we have a non-compliant software request, which is the most common way that we, most common form that we fill out, because this is really just saying like, hey, it's not compliant yet, but we're working with our vendors. And one of the things that we are doing is in our new forms that we're going to be creating, Central IT is creating, is that we have a instance with our vendors that says, do they have somebody on their team that works with accessibility? Do they have an accessibility specialist or a developer? Are they willing to work back and forth? Do they have a plan to keep things being with accessibility? Do they have standards? What standards are they using? Are we doing, level AA? For what CAD standards? Are we talking about other standards that are out there, like ADA standards, all of that other stuff, depending on what it is. And so we really kind of look at it as I end up looking at, when I look at these products that I get, it's like Quartex, I end up really kind of going through and going, okay, how is this person going to be using it? What's the point, and what's the how are they going to function in using it? And that allows me to understand that both accessibility and usability. It's kind of like a weird marriage. Like you can have a completely usable website but not have it accessible, and then vice versa. You can have a completely accessible website but then it's not usable whatsoever. So it's finding that happy marriage between the two that I really work with our vendors, especially with Quartex, going, hey, this may be accessible, but it may not be the most intuitive thing for our users to be able to do. And then we can go back and forth trying to do it because I don't have access to the back end, they do. So it ends up being like a forever partnership that we have, which is always really nice to have. I will note that on our end, what I do is that anytime we do publish something, we do have some sort of, we either have a statement that says, hey, this is a work in progress, which is what we currently have on our website, or I just have a libaccessibility email that I have that goes to me. And then if somebody reports something, hey, this isn't working, I can't read, my screen reader isn't going through on this one page or whatever, I can at least take that, see if I can replicate it. If I can replicate it, I forward it over to, Quartex or whoever our vendor is, and then work with them to get that resolved as soon as possible. So I think that's also important. I just spewed out a ton of information. I'm so sorry.
Well, no, I mean, we have worked together in quite some detail, I think, haven't we, in trying to resolve, or trying to identify and resolve some of these issues. And I think, Corinne, your help in doing that has been great and beneficial to anyone using our platform. I wonder if we could run through maybe some examples of elements that we have certainly enhanced and improved.
Yeah, let's run through these examples. So I will note that the first thing I have on here is accessibility is the journey. It's always, there's no end all be all. You're not going to be like, yay, it's 100% compliant. Software gets updated every 3 months or whatnot. Something may change. A developer may come on and change something, and then it breaks the whole system. Things change. We're always going to be working with each other. There is no, this is 100% accessible and we're never going to have to touch it ever again. That never happens. There's always going to be something. We would like the goal to be 100% accessible. We know that that's what we strive for. We just try and be practical about it. So I am going to point out a couple of examples. I'm going to the first example is so strikingly easy to show, which is our high contrast issue. So that when I first really got a chance to get into this, you can see that they have a high contrast button for our website. But if you put it in, you can see that in the top left-hand corner, you can barely see the Syracuse University Digital Collections Libraries logo, in the top left-hand corner. And then right underneath, under search, the library's digital collection in dark blue with a black background is a paragraph that you cannot read whatsoever. So this made it extremely difficult for, even somebody with 20/20 vision to be able to read this. You'll have to like highlight and then see if you can maneuver. It's a mess. It's a mess. We knew that. So when we went into it, I think the next page, that just really shows more of like what the high contrast is. And then this is another example of the high contrast. So I think I did not add the high contrast of what it is now, but it is much better if you go to our digital collections website, is digital collections at syr.edu, .syr.edu, and you click on the top right-hand corner button that is a high contrast button. You can see the vast contrast. This is another screenshot of one of the other pages. This is not our landing page. And you can see that just a description of one of the documents that we have is a white text on gray background using that high contrast, which makes it so difficult to read. And the only things that you can read are in black text, which are links to other information that is within the site. So it makes it difficult, even as a usable 100% able-bodied person, to be able to use this with high contrast settings. So we were able to work with Quartex and completely fix that, which is amazing.
Yeah, it was great. It prompted us to do a complete audit of the high contrast rendering, didn't it? So yes, and it's certainly good to see those improvements coming in.
Yes. Yeah. It is so good, and I think it's one of those things that people don't really realize, that having high contrast mode is for people who see better, where say they read better with white text on black background, because the high contrast is easier to see. Another reason why is to test these high contrast is also some people just actually see in grayscale. So it's actually helpful for us is that, developers, is people who are accessibility, to really just see, okay, what is this person more likely to see if they try and go to grayscale, or they're just seeing it as a black and white format. And this definitely shows how difficult it would be.
Yeah, I think you had some other examples beyond the contrast as well, didn't you?
Yeah, so this one's just a quick example. It's just we really were showing that we had a search bar. Like, one of the things that people forget is that accessibility is not just using your mouse and you can just click all over the place. It's also being able to use it in multiple formats. So keyboard accessibility is incredibly important for people who juggle with, maybe they're using a screen reader with the keyboard, but maybe just for mobility easy use, they can tab through things, tab through the whole entire website, and be able to search for these things. And this showed that, like, when you would tab through, it would show that you can exit out of the search bar before you can even search, which is counterintuitive to what you would think. You would think that when you tab through the format, you would be able to, it would go automatically into search, then advanced search, and then into exit or exit out of the search bar. So it's one of those things that I know that it's so minute, but we have been working with Quartex really hard on making sure that this logistically makes sense, because even if you are using a screen reader or not, if you were visually following along the highlighted bar of going through the search bar, you would expect it to read from left to right. So having it kind of skip around makes it much more difficult. So you can see that I kind of think of it as both accessibility and usability in this instance.
I think we had other examples of the keyboard controls as well, where your input was beneficial for us too.
Yeah, so this is the quick little video I kind of demonstrated. You can see all my crap background my files, but you can see that here now that if I click on that button, I can pull up and you can see that I can search for things now. That it makes more sense that I can kind of go back and forth and I'll be able to pull up a file. So, you know, we're getting there. We're getting there. So that quick little video, you guys can always test it yourself if you ever want to. I think that's it on my end.
Okay, thanks for those examples, Corinne. That's,
and this is the last page. I think we're handing it over to Deidre. But that's, what do you want me to? I can do it. I'll do it.
Sorry, I just was on mute. I had muted myself while you all were talking. But at any rate, this is just a note that we added to our website. And, you know, as we were thinking and talking about this before, I view this as like a badge of honor. I think this is our commitment to accessibility, Quartex's commitment to accessibility, and working with us to ensure that this site and the software is as accessible as it can be. So we are currently working to sort of resolve any like very last minute little issues, and I think we're going to probably be removing this accessibility statement from the front of our website. But until then, we just wanted to be open and honest and clear with our various users about the site that they're getting into, and you know, if they did have any need for mitigation or remediation, that would be something that we would be very happy to help them with, and we again work very closely with our partner Corinne.
Yeah, so and it's super helpful because we have our contact information right there, and they do have that goes straight to me. But then the digital collections also have their own feedback form that's not accessibility. So it's good to differentiate the two when you're having some sort of these blanket statements. And even when we take down this statement, we're going to have a spot where they like any users can find the accessibility contact information if something is, you know, missed. Because when I do a quick go through and see what's going on, I don't go through every single page that we have. That would be exhausting for one person. So I do a quick sample of like 5 pages and see what would be the common issues. And so there's always going to be something that I miss. Maybe somebody has a different software that I did not realize they have. And so they will like inform me just by having that statement.
But I think it's great what we've achieved so far, and as Deirdre says too there, I think this is a shared goal that we can work towards in terms of removing this statement. But as Corinne has also said, and she's actually just given us a couple of examples of what she's helped us with, but we've had improvements to keyboard controls, alt text and ARIA labels, I think, screen reader capacity, the contrast issues that Ashley and Felicity also referenced, keyboard focus. So there's been countless things that we've managed to enhance as part of this collaboration. And that's been great. And I think actually on the next slide, we've just got an example of where, for example, we have found that good reference to the colors used across the site, for example, so that you can establish that contrast, have been addressed, and where we have guidance around their use in the knowledge base articles featuring on the community platform too. So that's just one example where we've been able to, with the help of Corinne, to be proactive in terms of resolving some of these issues so that we can meet the goal that everyone's working towards. Thank you both for describing what you're doing there. I think the last part of our panel today, we're going to move across to talk to Yaz, who's a colleague at AM and is our UX designer. And she's going to run through some of the other things that we've been doing as AM and our general policy towards accessibility and how we meet those goals ourselves. Hi, Yaz.
Hello. Hi, everyone. As introduced by Martin, my name is Yaz. I'm the UX designer on the platform development team at AM. I specialize in user experience and accessibility, and I have over 6 years of experience in this field. So today I'm going to be talking about accessibility at AM. I'll be running this in kind of 3 parts. So in part 1, I'll cover where we are now and a look at our general approach to accessibility. In part 2, I'll be sharing a recent example of a product that needed extra accessibility consideration. And finally, in part 3, I'll be sharing where we're going and what the future of accessibility at AM looks like. So let's start with part 1, where we are and our vision. So at AM, as Corinne kind of mentioned earlier with Syracuse, we understand that accessibility is a journey, and it's one that we've embarked on proudly. Accessibility is ever evolving, and we understand that it's more about compliance. It's more than compliance. It's about enabling everyone to experience our products. So this is regardless of how they're interacting with them. To enable our customers to access our products, we've been adopting inclusive design principles to inform the choices we make. And as part of this, we're thinking about our users' needs throughout our development process. But what is inclusive design, I hear you ask? There we go. Inclusive design, we believe, is a mindset. So it means being aware of different physical and cognitive abilities, being aware of our users and the context with which they're accessing our products. We design with accessibility requirements at the forefront, so right from the start. So for example, we might start a project by mapping out the user journey of a keyboard-only user, or we might start by considering the information architecture on a screen reader. We're taking these considerations right from the get-go. How do we tackle accessibility in our development process? So our software engineers are continually learning about accessibility requirements and routinely referring to guidance when implementing new features. And alongside this, they're using automated accessibility tools to review their work, such as a tool called Axe. Our test analysts complete a whole nother level of comprehensive accessibility testing and follow a very rigorous accessibility testing strategy, and that uses both automated and manual testing. So that kind of covers our approach at AM, and in this next section, I'm going to be showing you a recent example. So for one of our recent products, Africa and the New Imperialism, we partnered with a company called HuMap to create an interactive map of the continent that showed the shifting political landscape from 1870 to 1915. However, due to a large number of geographical and political regions that we wanted to show on this map, it was difficult to depict the changing landscape in an accessible way. So the regions were kind of merging into each other for users with visual impairments or colour vision deficiency, also known as colour blindness. And we kind of reviewed accessibility guidelines and trialled several different colour variations. And we later turned to trialling patterns as well. So after various trials and rigorous testing, our final map included patterns to allow for better differentiation between different areas of the map. So you don't need to just rely on colour. We used a colourblind friendly contrasting blue and orange colour palette, and these two colours were used to denote the two different political parties. We used outlines to provide contrast between different areas, and we also implemented a larger key so that the patterns were displayed clearly. The key is also open by default to ensure that it's not hidden from users and they can see it right from the get-go. So on the next slide, I have a short demo of the map in action. So here you can see that the key is open by default and it's easily accessible anytime. You can zoom in and navigate the map and click the sections of the map for more information. You can do this with keyboard or a mouse. And when viewing a different point in the timeline, the key then opens by default again. So that covers our example. So now I'm going to be covering where we're going and what the future of Accessibility AM looks like. So firstly, we're partnering with a third party. So we want to reach an accessibility accreditation for the AM Quartex platform. The details of this accreditation are still kind of under discussion, but we hope to share this news with you in future and give you all the intricate details. And alongside this, we'll be creating guidance for customers on how to customize their AM Quartex product in the most accessible way, excuse me. We're also increasing our accessibility knowledge throughout the business. So from our content creators to our designers like me, our engineers and our test analysts, we're keeping on track with accessibility guidelines and are already looking ahead to the new WCAG 2.2 criteria. We're also, as I'm sure you've heard throughout this presentation, we're improving our accessibility all the time. So, for example, at the moment, we're looking to extend our existing closed caption capabilities for audio and video to add support for audio descriptions for video content. And just to kind of really hammer home that point that we know that accessibility really is a journey and accessibility is never kind of finished. You can't tick that box and say it's done. We're always improving and hoping to improve, and we're listening to customer feedback and welcome any insight into how we can make AM Quartex a better platform for everyone. And that's kind of all from me, so I'll pass back to you, Martin.
Thank you, yes. Good to see that example of the map for Africa and the new imperialism and what we're doing on that. We'll include a link to that site as well as the Towson University site and the Syracuse University site in this slide, so that will be available at the end. But I think now we could have a discussion, but perhaps we could base that around some of the questions that we might have as well. I think Mark has access to those questions, I believe.
Yes, excuse me a second while I bring up the questions. So thank you very much, everyone, for really interesting discussions there. I'm just trying to bring up, sorry, excuse me, the question panel in front of my screen. So I wonder if we could start really with a question, which I think probably maybe if we'll go around the group, is sort of what would be your sort of top piece of advice for anyone listening who has digital collections or thinking of publishing a new digital archive or working with a new vendor and wants to ensure that they're presenting their content in as many accessible ways as possible. So I wonder whether we could sort of go around the group and if you have sort of a top piece of advice that you would like to share. Who would like to start? Shall I just pick on?
Yeah, I think
if I pick on Ashley to start, please.
So I would say, you know, when we started this journey in 2017, I did not know a lot about web accessibility. So finding the people on campus or in your community that are really the experts and will help you understand what you should be looking for or what questions to be asking vendors. You know, we're all stronger based on the expertise that we bring to the table. So I would say kind of look to who you can partner with.
Great, thank you very much, Ashley. Felicity?
I guess I can't just say ditto, like that would be not cool. So I guess the other piece would also be to sort of explore what options there are out there. So like what other, what do vendors like Adam Matthews have to bring to the table? Are there things there that I see that I think would be valuable? So I would certainly say, you know, do your homework and see if you can find other people and like reach out to folks who are already using those programs or those to see what their experience has been.
How much do you talk to other institutions about commitment to accessibility? I mean, how much knowledge sharing is there?
Are you asking me?
Not if you don't want me to, Felicity, but I mean, I think that's a good point about shared resource and knowing the questions to ask and the approaches that you should take. You know.
I think that's something that's a growing thing, that people are more aware of something like that they really should be looking into things like that. And I think, you know, when we go to conferences, that might be a place where those kinds of conversations are happening more readily. Like I might not reach out to a colleague, you know, via email, but if we're all in the same space and we're watching presentations about things like this, or, you know, in a conference setting, that tends to be a place where we're having those conversations about like, well, what are you using, or what things have you found that have been helpful?
Yeah, I think it's just because you, as institutions, you've gone through a similar experience, both experience criticism, both sought to redress that and actually get to meet accessibility criteria. So yeah, it's obviously a common issue. I wonder if we could put that advice question to, say, Deirdre, perhaps as well. What advice you would take?
Yeah, I'm just, I agree. I can't say just ditto, although I do say ditto. Ashley, Felicity brought up two really great points. I guess what I might add to that is, and these almost seem contradictory, but first of all, don't be afraid to ask for, you know, like, even if it seems ridiculous, I think, and I know that we do that a lot with our Quartex partners, and they've been very patient with us, not on ridiculous things, but, you know, we ask for the world, and, you know, and if they can't do it, or if it's going to take a little bit more time, or if we're going to have to sort of negotiate on that a little bit, that's okay. And that's kind of the second half of this is, you know, again, going back to what also Yaz pointed out, that accessibility is a journey. And so we do want to be patient, because we don't want to like cut off all access to materials just because they aren't 100% fully accessible. That sort of is counterintuitive, obviously. So really kind of like finding your balance and communicating with all the stakeholders. So, you know, another one of the things that Corinne and her team help with is having these conversations with our information community and technology panel at Syracuse University, and saying, look, you know, we've done this, this, and this, and we know that you need this and this, and we're working to get there, but, you know, it is going to take kind of, you know, another set of efforts. There's going to be a couple more sprints involved. And so, yeah, just open communication as well. So now I didn't give you my top piece of advice. I said just three kind of interconnected things. I apologize.
It's very useful anyway, I'm sure. Yeah, it's sort of an end goal to work towards, but a degree of pragmatism in terms of getting there, as well as proactivity, I suppose. Yeah. Did we have another question though?
I wondered if Corinne would like to.
My piece of advice.
Apologies, Corinne.
My piece of advice: just make sure you have somebody on both the vendors team in your team who deals with accessibility, whether it's your developer and they have been trained, at least have gone to, you know, edu causes, you know, like any sort of, like basically if they go to train, go practice, basically get all the information they can, then work with, basically have specialists, but not, and I know not everybody can afford to have somebody dedicated to their team, but being able to have everybody have this knowledge and be able to learn, I think that's the most important thing.
Great, thank you. And I guess, Yaz, with your sort of partial focus on accessibility, I guess that's probably a piece of advice that you would completely agree with.
Yeah, definitely. I think my other big piece of advice would be to try to kind of focus on the empathy of the situation as well. So try to consider those users who have accessibility requirements and maybe try out your site from their perspective. I think building empathy really helps everyone kind of get on board with the accessibility journey.
Great, thank you very much. We've had a couple of questions in that are very, very sort of Quartex technical specific, so I'd be very happy to sort of respond to those separately and keep the discussion much more widely on your own experiences. I think something else that I think would be quite interesting is where, and I think Deirdre particularly, you sort of just alluded to this, is when working with vendors, is there a particular way that you have approached these kind of conversations, and how receptive have different vendors been to flexing to meet these needs? I wonder, does anyone sort of have a specific, an answer that immediately that they would like to share? Or
I mean, I think Quartex, honestly, you all have been as responsive as anyone I've ever worked with in terms of acknowledging and meeting us where we are, and the practices that we have followed, because it's part of our policy is, we try to write some stuff into the contract. So, identify what those issues are and then get them documented. But then also just sort of making sure that we are in constant communication about it. You don't want to like write something into your contract and then check on it 3 years later. This is going to be a constant back and forth. So so that would be one of the ways that I would say we communicate with our vendors, but not all of them have been as receptive to this kind of feedback, to be perfectly frank.
Interesting, thank you. And Ashley, Felicity, do you have anything to add on that point?
I would say that we've had the most in-depth conversations about web accessibility with AM Quartex. But one of the things that we've built in since signing on with you all was to develop a web accessibility task force that we now have that audit process within the library before it goes to kind of the central IT department. So we have built in some type of checkpoint and assessment to accessibility. And this, I think, the conversations that we had with you all when we were first exploring an agreement has really kind of laid the groundwork for that.
That's really great to hear. Thank you very much, Ashley. I'm aware that we're up to the hour, so I think, as I say, any other questions that we've not covered, we will address those offline after the session. But thank you all very much for the questions that you have asked. So just round things off really by pointing out the links that Martin referred to earlier. So to learn more about the work of Towson University and Syracuse University, you can visit their digital collections at archives.towson.edu and digitalcollections.syr.edu. And to learn more about the AM collection referenced by Yasmin, so Africa and the New Imperialism, you can visit amdigital.co.uk/discover/collections to find out more about that particular collection. And to learn more about Quartex itself, or to request a demo or trial and see some of these features in practice for yourself, please visit amdigital.co.uk/Quartex. So I would like to thank all of our panelists for generously giving us their time today. It's been a really interesting discussion and I'm very grateful to you all. So thank you. We'll email all of you in the audience very soon with a link to watch today's session on demand, and we hope to see you again at a Quartex webinar soon. Thank you very much.